If one wants to set up shop, one has to go and find suppliers, retailers, set up partnerships, enter into agreements, hire people. If one looks at the economy in which we live, it is simultaneously one in which there is healthy competition and at the same time a great deal of cooperation. It would be impossible to get on in life to produce anything without cooperation. The notion that somehow competition attaches to the market and cooperation attaches to the idea of socialism, I think is in itself somewhat simplistic. As for the idea of production, I agree with you that it is healthy, it is sensible for people to consume what they produce. I don't think we see much evidence of people doing otherwise. I think that once one has produced more than one can consume, what comes into the picture is the notion of division of labor. I produce 12 shoes, I only need 2, I'm not Imelda Marcos. You produce a lot of chicken, I'm hungry, you'd like something to wear, so I trade you my shoes for your chicken. That to me is not subversive or immoral, and that notion of barter is at the heart of capitalism. Now, one point that Christopher raised very much in this connection was the notion of exploitation. I read his central argument, by the way, to come down to the fact that socialism is not a viable economic system, but rather should be cherished for contributing about 5 words to the English dictionary. But one of them was exploitation. And exploitation, again, is the very antithesis of the free market, which is based on the idea of voluntarism. There is no involuntary transaction that occurs in a free market. Somebody wants to sell you something, you don't have to buy it. If you don't like it, you can leave. If you buy it, it's then a bit much to claim that you're being exploited. Every transaction is in the mutual interest of the buyer and the seller. If it is not a voluntary transaction, there is something in it that is inimical to the free market. There's something in it that's wrong. There's something anti-capitalist about it. And I agree with you, in those circumstances, we should do something about it. All those transactions, however, occur under socialist economies, when people are told what to produce. When they produce things, their goods are taken away. They are given rations at the arbitrary discretion of planners. That, to me, is exploitation. But for me to work as I will, to agree to come to a debate, to buy the kind of car that I like, to travel as I will, that's not exploitation.
Oh, yes. Okay. I mean, socialism is not a critique of human greed. It's not, nor is it a critique of feudalism or of any other thing really than the capitalist mode of production, which it admires. As I said, sometimes in forms more extravagant than the ones Dinesh has been able to bring to bear, but admires nevertheless. But continues to ask the question: look, who is going to believe that it's just a matter of individuals striking bargains in the agora? Who really, apart from you, defends capitalism in that way now? We have much more urgent questions to ask ourselves. Who made these investment decisions? Who decided that, for example, that it would be military Keynesianism that pulled capitalism out of the slum? How was that done? How was it decided that's where the resource allocation would go? I would take you up, in fact, on one of the earliest points you made, which was that in India, the matter is, what does the state own? I would say not. I think the matter is who owns the state, who controls and orders the state's policies. No one can say that in India that's done in a socialist basis. India is well known to be a post-colonial, comprador, semi-capitalist economy with a tremendous state subsidy for certain large families and corporations. To call it socialist is a parody of both our positions. Now, all these are very important questions, and none of them are solved by this thing of, well, I've made something, you want to buy it, which is more like a crack house model of both of economy and behavior. So I think that we have to, in a sense, modernize it. What if though, you say no decision, I think I can hold you to this, and you said no exploited or no involuntary decision is made in these transactions. Now, how do we know that? What if you want to buy meat at your local Boris Yeltsin-approved supermarket, where everyone pauses in holy awe before the cascade of rude plenty? What if you want to have meat that hasn't been treated with steroids? Where do you go for that? How do you know, in the first place, that it has been? That someone's taken the decision they could make more money by treating it with steroids and pumping up the meat a bit? Suppose you've been able to find out that there is that kind of meat and you don't want it. Where are you going to go to get that? All these are real-life decisions made in an actual market of actually existing capitalism. And they all have a history of investment decision and resource allocation decision taken behind them. And they have the history of class struggle behind them, too, if you don't mind me pointing it out. And it's just not good enough to say, you know, it's all a bargain and you only lose if you're a sucker. So I would neither vindicate nor repudiate, but hope to transcend what you would say.
Given that Mr. Hitchens has posed a couple of questions, Mr. Sousa can respond.
I think Christopher, what you seem to be complaining about is less free market decisions than democratic decisions. In other words, your beef seems to be less with capitalism than with democracy. You are upset by the fact that the Truman administration dropped the atomic bomb. You talk about the plutonium state as though socialist countries, as though the Soviet Union doesn't possess a nuclear arsenal, as though nuclear weapons were some sort of a genetic possession of capitalism. We can ask all kinds of interesting and esoteric questions about who runs the state, who really runs the government, in whose pocket is the Congress, and so on. I submit that this is really what socialism has come down to, a kind of intellectual seminar, a kind of trading in witticisms, if you will, without being really rooted in what's going on the street or what's going on in the economy. How do goods get produced? You can ask all kinds of interesting questions about whether, in fact, all of you are now under mind control, which I guess was an earlier insinuation. Perhaps you are, perhaps you aren't. Perhaps you exist, perhaps you don't. Nevertheless, at some mundane level, we all go about our lives and are interested in such things as getting an education, getting a job, perhaps getting married, so on. Capitalism gives one the means to undertake these decisions. Perhaps they're delusions, but nevertheless, at our crude level of consciousness, we enter into them. And capitalism makes it possible for us to do that in a way that socialism doesn't. Let's take the example of steroids in the apples or whatever. It's capitalist economies that, it is in capitalist countries that standards of safety have been maintained, that pollution has been kept under control to a much greater extent than in socialist economies where, for example, in the Soviet Union, life expectancy has been going down. Going down. And this is true also in other countries in Eastern Europe. Health is in such a bad way, contraceptives are not available, women are forced to resort to abortions. By every measurable index, whether one is talking about quality of life, infant mortality, and so on, capitalist countries, free market economies, come out better. Could it be coincidence? This is something that socialist economies don't deny. It's precisely why socialist economies want to move more in the direction of capitalist economies. I'm not maintaining, I don't think I said, that capitalism or the free market solves all human problems. That's not true. There remain spiritual dilemmas, ethical dilemmas that are unresolved, that will remain, that we still have to deal with. Capitalism is a system for organizing the economy. It does not, like socialism, pretend to be a theology. It's a system for deciding for the production and distribution of goods. And that, I submit, it does extremely well. And with the kind of safety net, welfare state democracy, if you will, we have the possibility and the reality of government involvement in the economy